Well, this is Ed Stetzer Live, and I'm Ed Stetzer, and we are live. You know, over the holidays, we take some breaks with our family, primarily like you did as well, but it's good to be back live and in person, and in my case, back in the U.S. In the last few shows, we've been in Oxford, England. We had technological problems in Egypt, but anyway, we're back here in the normal studio, so that's super. Again, my name's Ed Stetzer. I'm the Dean of the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. And for the privilege I have every Saturday of being your host. And of course, many of you listen to this as a podcast. Let me remind you, you can do that by going to edstetzerlive.com. I always kind of apologize for saying Saturday because so many of you listen via podcast, but it does broadcast live on Saturday. And so, but we're glad you're here. We get to have some great conversations, and we're kicking off the new year with what I think will be a really great one. So Andrew Hopper is our guest. He's the lead pastor of Mercy Hill Church in Greensboro, North Carolina, and he's passionate about multiplication and church planting through the Mercy Hill Collaborative. I know the church, thankful for it. They're doing great stuff. He also coaches others in public speaking, preaching, and leadership. For our conversation today, though, he's the author of Chosen, Building Your Family the Way God Builds His. And specifically, even though it's not in the title, that's a conversation in and around adoption. And I think we're going to have a great conversation. I think many of you have adopted. You'll want to weigh in and join our conversation as well. Let me tell you now the phone number. It's 877-548-3675. Andrew, welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about your story and how adoption fits into that.
Yeah, Ed, thank you, man. I'm really grateful to be here, grateful for you. Me and Anna both had, my wife Anna, we've been married for 20 years. And it's funny, the Lord had wired us up, I think, for adoption independently before we came together. I had spent years on every summer of my life from 12 to 22 on the mission field in Montana, working on Native American reservations and, just having an opportunity to see up close the plight of a lot of kids that were underserved, a lot of kids that came from broken families, a lot of kids that were displaced and weren't living with mom and dad. Anna had spent time on the mission field in China and had served in orphanages. And so the Lord was kind of wiring us up, I think, for this. And then, as you know, our common friend, my mentor, Pastor J.D. Greer, we landed at the Summit Church after college, going to go to Southeastern Seminary. And of course, the Summit Church was very adoption minded. And so it kind of just poured fuel on that fire. And Anna and I, we had some friendships that were close with international adoption. We just really felt like the Lord was calling us to that. And so we put our yes on the table very early in our seminary life. And we ended up trying to go through an adoption agency in Raleigh, North Carolina. The problem at that time was they needed to have one of the parents be the primary caregiver, stay home. And man, I was in seminary and I was teaching school. It just wasn't in the cards. And so we tried to go through foster care. We stayed licensed for a year, never had a placement. It was a little bit frustrating. We ended up having 3 biological kids and came back around to the conversation around 2016 after we had planted Mercy Hill. It was a crazy time. I know you're a church planner. Things were popping off, blowing and going, but we really felt like this was the time to step back into these waters. And man, about a year later, actually that original agency that we had gone through, by this time my wife was staying home with our kids, and so we went back with that agency, and Faith Ann came into our life in 2017.
So great. Well, let's talk. Let's ask some of the obvious questions that are there, and we're going to also invite our audience to call in and join the conversation as well. Just a reminder to our audience, our phone number is 877-548-3675. That's 877-548-3675. Our guest is Andrew Hopper, and he has a brand new book, and it's a helpful book. I've had a chance of looking through it. It's Chosen, Building Your Family the Way God Builds His. So adoption is, and I will tell you later on, I'll share a little bit, like we were very open to and looked into adoption. I'll share a little bit how our story had some factors like yours that didn't enable us to. But one of the questions that people ask is, adoption, typically you think of people who can't have children and therefore they adopt. Tell me, what was the motivation for you and your wife to adopt when you have biological children?
Yeah, one of the authors of another great book on adoption, Orphanology, Tony Merida, he says it like this: Christians don't adopt out of biology, they adopt out of theology. And it is our theological impulse to understand what God did in our life is what we have an opportunity to do in others. God did something for us spiritually that we have an opportunity to do for others physically. Of course, when we say God did something for us spiritually, it goes right to the heart of the gospel message. One thing I share anytime I'm talking about adoption is whether people realize it or not. I think they do realize it in their in their heart. They may not be able to articulate it like this, but every single Christian has come into God's family, but one way. We have all come through the spirit of adoption. We see this through the book of Romans. We certainly see it in Galatians, but we are not, Ephesians 2, we are not, because of our sin, we are not naturally born into the family of God. In our sin, we are separated from God and we are strangers, the Bible actually says. We are outside of the covenants of promise, but because of Jesus Christ paying the price for our sin, God allows us to be adopted back into his family. And so I think for the Christian, even if you haven't thought about it a ton, many times you see a really great sympathy when it comes to the plight of the orphan. We see this all the way, the orphan, you see it through the church's work with the unborn, but certainly with the orphan, with the foster child, and with adoption. Even if people haven't thought about it a ton, I think there is a great sympathy because deep in our heart we understand that this is the way that we came into the family of God as well, and what God has done for us we want to do for others. I say it in the book like this, adopted people adopt people,
Right.
chosen people choose people. And so, whether we ever do it or not, I'm not saying every single Christian is called specifically to adopt. I think we are called to hold the rope for those who are and to be involved in the life of the orphan. Um, but we have a great sympathy for this. I know Ed, you've done a lot of work. We've been in a lot of the same rooms with different denominations and different networks and things like that. It's funny. I've been at local things with or not even local, actually national things with our, we're a part of the Southern Baptist Convention. And it's so funny because I've been in rooms where, they're bringing up different issues that are hot topics of the day. And you just immediately see the sectionalism and factions that form
Sure. Sure.
on these things. And I was at a local, I keep saying local, I was at a national convention a few years ago, and it was a room filled with leaders, people that are leading different networks and things like that. And there was a lot of things we couldn't agree on. But the second the conversation in that room turned toward, well, maybe we should really be lifting up, the plight of the unborn, adoption, foster care, orphans. Immediately, the entire room was unified. And immediately there
Love
was a
that.
cheer. Actually, there was an
Yeah.
ovation. I felt like, man, most of the meeting was a boo, and this was
Yeah.
beginning to cheer. And it's like, man, I think that's right. There's something that speaks deeply in our heart as believers because we were adopted in the family of God as well.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And again, I mean, I had you on the show, so obviously I liked your book. I like where you headed. I was 10 years ago or so, some of this, this emphasis has bubbled up in the Christian context. And about 10 years ago, some of it bubbled
Mhm.
up. And there was so much good. And then to me, it almost became a gospel imperative that, you really need to adopt, and probably in some places or situations, people who shouldn't have did. So again, I partly like you even said it. It's we were chosen, therefore we have
Mhm.
chosen to adopt as well. So how do you help people navigate and think about that? Again, I'm very positively. I love your book,
Yeah.
and I'm just trying to figure out because I just remember, and maybe you remember that 10 years ago differently. But how do you navigate? Say, if this is something that's adoption's inherent to the gospel, then everyone should seek to adopt, I guess, is the
Yeah.
theological idea.
Yeah, first of all, I totally agree. It might even go back further than 10 years. And in the book, I say that's a good thing. When I was growing up, adoption in the Christian circle was certainly not demeaned, but it never was
Right.
discussed.
Yeah.
Just generally. I mean, it was kind of like even kids that I knew that were adopted, it was still a little bit of that culture of like, well, we don't really talk about that. The parents weren't able to
Huh.
have kids or whatever. And so it wasn't a bad thing. It just wasn't really discussed. And then, yeah, somewhere along the way, I think Adopted for Life came out, and there was, I think it was good. It opened up a broader conversation. The way I think about it, Ed, is exactly the way I think about the mission field. You cannot be, I don't think, a gospel Christian and not be concerned and working toward the discipleship of all nations. But that
Hmm.
does not mean everybody leaves and goes to be a missionary overseas. There's a lot that we do. We're missional where we are. There's a lot that we do to help. But then there are people that God has marked out specifically with the wiring, the strength, the fortitude to be able to actually live in an overseas context in the face of incredible adversity and to be able to share the gospel on the front lines in that way. Now, it's not a perfect analogy. There's no perfect analogies. I do think about it a little bit that way when it comes to adoption. It'd be very hard for me if I was talking to a Christian and they were like anti-adoption,
I
you
know, I
know.
know, and I know some
Um,
who are, which is crazy. But yeah, I
that
agree.
would be tough. Hey, and you've seen this.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen some of
Yep.
this stuff right now, like the presidential proclamation that came out. Some of our families right now are having a really hard time with, they were very close to their international adoption being, you know, uh, the children being brought in, and a lot of this visa stuff right now. Adoptions used to almost universally be sort of exempt from those types of orders, and right now they're not. We're working on that, but anyway, yeah, it'd be hard for me if someone was anti. But the flip side of that is not true as well. To like beat people over the head and give them a bunch of guilt about, hey, every single person is called to adopt or enter the foster care
Right.
system. I think that all of us can be supportive. We can be in prayer. We can grab the families who are wired up for this. I really believe that language is right. Ephesians 2:10 tells me that there are works that God has prepared beforehand that we should walk in. They're not all the same. And I think that they connect deeply with the way that God has wired us and spiritually gifted us. And for some, that means walking in adoption. And for all, I think it means being adoption minded and supporting those who are. Now, I will say this, I don't think everyone's called to adopt. I do think that maybe more than are should be thinking about it.
Yeah. Me too.
But it is
Me too.
not the same
Yeah.
thing then to create that next step and create tons of guilt in people's lives, and tell them that everyone must do this as if it's a gospel imperative, as you said.
Well, and so we've kind of said the basics around it, but let's talk about it so that we can think more deeply about it. Because I agree with you, and I'm excited about your book. I'm excited about having a conversation about it. The book is Chosen: Building Your Family the Way God Builds His by Andrew Hopper. Our phone number for your calls, maybe you've got questions about adoption or a story about adoption, is 877-548-3675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. Stay with us. We can hear a conversation about adoption and the book Chosen. Hey, we're back. Ed Stetzer Live. I'm Ed Stetzer. We're continuing our conversation with Andrew Hopper. His book is Chosen: Building Your Family the Way God Builds His. And it is kind of interesting. I know you, Andrew, primarily from pastoring and church planting. That's something the things you're passionate about, both. So it's kind of interesting to me that you've kind of stepped into this conversation about adoption. Of course, some of that's driven by your own personal story, which I love. But also, I really do appreciate how it's also driven by a theological idea for you. You talk about gospel framing. You're clear in the book that adoption starts with the gospel, not guilt. So why is it important that you frame adoption first as a theological reality before a practical one?
Yeah, I think that everything flows downhill from the inner meditations of the heart, and I just think that's the way that the Bible is set up. I mean, the tagline of the book is cute pictures and sad stories are good reasons to adopt. The problem is adoption is so hard, you're going to need a great reason. um, I kind of set up a little bit of, hey, there's a lot. I mean, you can lay it on, man, when it comes to guilt with the amount of sad statistics, global trends. You can talk about story after story of children who have just been in the most horrific situations. And it's an easy thing to do to pull on people's heartstrings and push them in that way. The problem is, and this is what I've learned, our we didn't talk about this yet, Ed, but our adoption is a special needs adoption. My daughter
Right.
is, she has Down syndrome. She probably has some other things going on that we'll never know. She didn't have any prenatal care and some things like that. She's on the lower end of functionality for Downs. I think a lot of people, when I say Down syndrome, they just sort of have this. picture in their mind of something they've seen on TV or somebody they saw at Walmart or Target or something. And what they don't realize is most of those depictions are kind of the highest level of functionality. Downs is very much a spectrum.
Hmm.
And so, man, she's the light of our life, but there's a lot that comes with that. And for me, I tell a story in the book, but the third or fourth time that we're in an ambulance going to the ER because Down syndrome is associated with so many other physical ailments and problems. I'm heading to the hospital again. I've got three other healthy biological children who have never ridden in an ambulance. Um,
Right.
I can tell you that when we're on the way to the hospital, the plight of the orphan worldwide almost doesn't mean anything to me.
Mm.
It's like, man, that's at least that's not what I'm thinking about, I should say. That's not the motivation at that moment. When we're dealing with something that's incredibly hard, it's just, man, the cute picture and the sad story is frail because the sad story won't be sad enough and the cute picture won't be cute enough. And that's why we really try to frame this book as the deepest level of motivation for adoption. I hope you would agree with this. I mean, I think really when it comes to any of the outputs in our Christian life, the highest level we can go to in terms of motivation is the gospel. It's not the only motivation. I think there's a lot of motivations in the Christian life to do many of the things that God calls us to. But, when we get at the very core of why we want to act in a Christian way, I think it's because we've been adopted into the family, we've been given an identity, and rather than being afraid of being kicked out of that family, we have a deep desire to live into the culture and the identity of that family. And we have been we're co-heirs. I mean, we have been brought in by the blood of Christ, and we want to live out and grow in our sanctification in that way. And I think adoption is one of a myriad of things that Christians do as an outflowing of that gospel change that's happened in their heart. And so, I tell our church, we Anna and I did not adopt because we wanted our church to go in this direction or because our church had a ministry in this direction. Instead, it's the other way. Our church has a ministry in this direction, and we adopted, and many of the families in our church have adopted, and many of them hold the rope for those who are, because we believe the gospel compels us by our own story of adoption to be involved in things like this as believers. And so that's kind of the highest level motivation of why we wanted to start from the theological framing rather than the practical reality of the sad story and the cute picture.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And I would say, I'm close with a Calvary Chapel, Fort Lauderdale, and they have a similar passion to their ministry, partner ministry for kids. And they basically say, Christians should be the highest motivated. I mean, everyone should, but Christians should have the highest motivation. And their desire is that, there's the foster system and the adoption, that South Florida would just be covered with Christians. And I love that. But it does. I mean, it takes more. It takes a village, you might say, but it takes more than just the family. I mean, this is part of what you write about in the book is the need, the necessity of kind of the whole church, and you talk about that in terms of holding the ropes. So let's let me give a phone number again, because after you answer this question, we're going to take calls.
Yeah.
And our phone number is 877-548-3675. So 877-548-3675. So what are some ways that when families step up to adopt, that churches then can be a part of the family of God coming alongside in this adoption?
Yes, it's so important. And you mentioned this earlier. I think that there was kind of an in vogue, sort of an imperative in the Christian church. You have to adopt. A lot of people jumped into these waters, and some of them got really hurt by it because they weren't ready for it. They weren't mature enough for it. I think now some of the backlash can be, well, we just take our ball and go home. We don't talk about it. I think that's not right as well.
Right.
I think that what we do is we correct and we continue to move. And part of that correction is to the best that we can, we provide the support for these families. Now, I will say this very straightforwardly. There is no amount of support from a church that will ever overcome the fact that when its family steps into spiritual or steps into adoption, they are stepping onto the battlefield of spiritual war. And
Mm.
so we need to be supporting them, and that's a reason we do support them. But it doesn't take away the reality that Satan will, mobilize his war machine against families who are seeking Christian adoption. And I think it's as simple as this. most people in the world, get, statistically, most people, especially here in our country, become believers when they're young. It's a faith
Right.
transfer in the home that happens. A lot of people most people come to the king's table through the kitchen table. And so if I was Satan, I could not think of anything I would hate more than trying to repair something that has been broken in terms of putting kids in Christian homes where that can happen. So
Yeah.
we do need to support them, but we need to be very real. And I try to do that in this book. It is a fight and it is a war. Now, in terms of supporting them, we use the term "hold the rope," which has become a very popularized kind of idea in missions. I love it. I love the story. Andrew Fuller, William Carey. William Carey said, "Father of modern missions, I'll go down into the pit and dangle the end of this rope, Andrew, if you will hold the rope." And Fuller did that, right? He raised money. He preached, he raised awareness, and basically the idea is one person is stepping onto the front line, the other one is going to stay by the stuff, so to speak. They're going to help support from the outside. And so at Mercy Hill, that looks different for different families, but there is a basic rope holder playbook that I include in the appendix of this book as well for churches. This book is really set up. I pray that churches would be able to kind of be mobilized by it, so we put a lot of resources in it. But primarily what it means is that when people step into this ministry, they are paired up with people either from their community group at Mercy Hill or from just a pool at large of people who have gone through a basic rope holder training. But then from there, it's very individualized because you got to think, when people are stepping into adoption or foster care, they're bringing an entire set of relationships, of resources with them. And so it's not tailor made of what they actually need. For some, they're going to need a lot of childcare help because they don't live around extended family. And this adoption is coming from the foster care system, which means endless meetings with social workers and judges. So people are
Right.
going to need to be there to help their other biological kids. For other people, it might mean, hey, we're going to be out of country for 6 weeks. Can you kind of look over our home? So, we have basic training of what these people are doing in terms of rope holder, but at the same time, it's very individualized. If I can, I'll give you a quick story from our own adoption. Our daughter, she was born special needs. She was in the IC, the NICU for 2 months. It was very tough. And it was an hour and a half away. My wife was there half the day, at home half the day, every single day. It was very hard. We were homeschooling our other kids. Halfway during her time in the NICU, I got the flu,
Mm.
and they wouldn't let anybody go from our whole house. And to me and my wife, it was unacceptable that our daughter would go any days of her life without people there praying for her and singing to her and holding her and trying to get her to take a bottle, which was very difficult for her with the way she navigates things with her mouth through Down syndrome. And so immediately there were people from our community group that were in the car and heading east towards Raleigh to say, hey man, we'll be the ones there to hold and to sing with her and stay the night and do it for 2 days until y'all can get back over here. That's just a quick example of the church being the church. But we would be I don't know where we would be without people who held the rope for us.
Yeah, so good, so good. I think I'm gonna see if we have time to get in a call. Yeah, we do. So let's take a call from Wendy in Lookout Mountain. Wendy, you're live on the air. Jump right in.
Hi, I'm actually somebody that has been impacted by help from other people in the church. When my sister ran away and got pregnant, and when she didn't want to do adoption, other people came around her and encouraged her. So that made my husband and I called to the Ministry of Adoption and supporting other single women. And we ended up having many foster babies in our homes over the years. And I actually co-wrote a book about choosing abortion or adoption called Empty Arms. But one of the stories I have in there that is really touching is a baby was abandoned at the hospital here locally. He was Guatemalan, and he had a real bad cleft lip. And so the nurse said to call Bethany Services, and they called my friend, who's also a foster mother. It took 3 foster families in order to feed him, take turns feeding him and caring for him because it was so much work. And we said, who's going to adopt him? And the Lord provided over the internet. We put it out, and this couple responded and said they had adopted a Guatemalan boy with a cleft lip, and he's praying for a brother. And we're coming.
Wow.
We're coming with our RV. We know this about the surgery. We live near a hospital, and we will see to it. And then 2 years later, we get a picture of how wonderful he looks.
Wow.
Wendy, I have to interrupt you because we kind of couple that music means I got 11 seconds left before it turns off. But super story. If you hold on the line, we're going to give you a copy of the book, Chosen, Building Your Family the Way God Builds Hills. Thanks so much for sharing. We'll continue our conversation in just a moment. All right, we're back. Ed Stetzer Live. We're having a great conversation with Andrew Hopper, and we're having that conversation around adoption and his new book, Chosen, Building Your Family the Way God Builds His. And I would love to hear from some of our callers, maybe how your church is engaged and involved in holding the rope, as Andrew called it in his book, Chosen, or maybe your own personal journey experience. We heard great Wendy just shared a moving example of that as well. And again, I have some copies of the book. I'm going to give away 4 more copies of the book to insightful callers with questions or comments. It's not like call in, hey, am I caller number 7? Did I win the book? No, it's your insightful calls and comments. We'd love to hear from it. Maybe your church is engaged and involved in adoption. Maybe you've gone through that yourself. Maybe you got a story or a question for Andrew. I mean, Andrew's written on the topic. He's out here saying, hey, I'm here to give advice and counsel. Our phone number is 877-548-3675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. You know, you talk about fear-based obedience, and whether it's in parenting or faith, how it kind of breaks down. How does the doctrine of adoption, which is a strange phrase, but it comes right, it's right from what you're talking about. How does the doctrine of adoption help replace fear with security, spiritually and in the home?
Well, I think in Romans 8, we have a real clear picture of that from Romans 8:15 that says we didn't receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but the spirit of adoption by which we cry out, Abba, Father. I think that a great example that I've heard before is imagine a child that's in a home that's 8 or 9 years old, and let's say they're biological, it's just their family, but every time they make a mistake, they just apologize 100 times, and they're so fearful, and they can't eat, and they're just tormented because they are afraid that they're going to get kicked out of the family. We would look in at that and we would say, wow, that is such an unhealthy situation. And we've got to really help that child understand that even when we make mistakes, there is something in terms of their identity having been born to these parents that means that they're never kicked out of the family. And that assurance actually, and I mentioned this word earlier when I said culture, I think it is that assurance that is going to bring them more of a heart posture that wants to align with the culture of the family and exhibit the traits of being a member of the family. Rather than the fear of getting kicked out, the greater motivator is going to be, I'm in. I'm blessed, favored, forgiven, and loved. And that's going to make us want to grow up into and take our place in that family. And so, yeah, I mean, I liken it to, you could put the fire under somebody with guilt, fear, shame. But you put the fire in them when you're able to say, hey, there's nothing you can do tomorrow that's going to make God love you any less. There's nothing you could do that's going to make him love you any more. You are his child bought with the precious blood of Christ, and he sees you in the way that he sees his son, and you are in the family now. That's going to make, that generally speaking is going to make us want to run through a wall in a way that fear, I believe, can just never touch. And so then when you sort of bridge that into this discussion that we have, it is so applicable because it's one of the only places. I mean, Ed, I don't know what you think. I think the 2 greatest metaphors for the gospel that God has given us and embedded us into humanity itself is marriage and then adoption.
Yeah.
And, in marriage, we see something about the gospel that you can't see any other way. I think adoption is the same way. And so that idea being brought into the family, we can express that so tangibly when we step into the vital ministry waters of adoption and really foster care as well. I mean, we say it at Mercy Hill, we want to build families through adoption, we want to restore families through foster care. But both of those things are really a reflection of what we believe God's intention for the world is.
Yeah, that's so good. And I do think it's interesting. I mean, we all, I mean, I don't know everybody who listens like thinks this way, but in theological education or in pastoring, I mean, we see marriage as this picture of the gospel. But I mean, adoption, as you said, it's very prevalent as this theme. So one of the things I like about your book is you draw from the scriptural themes of adoption towards earthly adoption, but also the fact that adoption is a picture of our adoption in Christ. And I like how you sort of weave those things together. And I think that's one of the unique and helpful contributions of your book. And for me, I think that kind of speaks to. And by the way, the book title again is "Chosen: Building Your Family the Way God Built His." It kind of speaks to one of the recurring themes in your book is that there's a bit of a sense that I don't know. There's a sense that you make the case, and I think rightly so, that all of us have some role to play. We may not be the adoptive parents, but all of us have some role to play. And you make that theological case, and you make that practical case. I mean, again, you talked about the appendix and all those sorts of stuff. So if I'm, we didn't adopt. We really wanted to. We were not. We through some family circumstances, we weren't able to. So how could someone like me and my family be involved, still have a role to play in adoption?
Yes, I actually just had an opportunity to meet with a very influential group of business leaders, really from our community, probably 10 or 15 churches represented, and had the opportunity to share with them these exact things, two or three exact kind of practical ways that they could be involved. Again, I think it goes, you start with motivation. I know we keep going back to that. I almost overdo that in the book on purpose. I remember hearing a story. It was very much like Wendy's, so I wanted to share it. I have a friend.
Please.
We have a friend, that their family adopted a child from a Central American country that had Down syndrome, and the story was that this child showed up on the orphanage doorstep, very similar to Wendy's story. And what had happened was he had just been born. He was obviously physically deformed, and he had been left, sadly, tragically, in a trash heap in a dump. And a guy was building. He was a local builder, was building a house near there, and he could hear the crying. And he went into the dump, and he got the baby boy out and brought him to the orphanage. And this family that ended up adopting Eddie, they said, man, when they heard his story, the father, Jim, said, Eddie's story and my story are exactly the same. I too was
Mm.
saved from a trash heap by a carpenter. And
Right.
when we have that in our heart, I think it enables us to ask the question you're asking with sincerity, how can I help? Now, the first thing is, we think about, can you step forward and adopt or foster? I know there's life circumstances, as you mentioned. I do think more, like I said, I think that more people than ours should. And I think that we're a little fearful of what it's going to take from us. But many of us, God has wired us up for this and we could get after it. But if that's off the table, then I think the second thing we can do is pray for and support local families that we know that are adopting, become adoption minded.
Yeah.
There's a prevalence. The stories of adoption are prevalent. And if we really begin to get our mind and our eyes up, the chances are within the community of faith, you're going to run into somebody who's walking this road because God has put it deep in our heart. It is our story. Barna research tells us the Christian faith, the families of the Christian faith are twice as likely to adopt children as anybody else in our context in our nation. I've never seen research on this. Ed, you're the researcher. I'd love for you to maybe take this on. I think it's such a testimony, but I would imagine from what I've seen that if you expanded that research and said, let's think about the families that already have biological kids and then step into the adoption waters, I think Christianity would all of a sudden not be 2-to-1, it'd be 10-to-1 or 100-to-1, because we have this theological framework that is pushing us. And so my point is, you're going to have people, I bet you're going to have people in your life, if you begin to put your eyes up, if you're a believer that are walking this road, pray for them, tell them you're praying for them, ask them how to help. It doesn't have to be a formal rope holding ministry from your church, although that would be great, but just being mindful of them. How can we help? What do you need around the house? How can we help with the other kids? We're in your corner. You're stepping into the fight. We're going to be your ring man here. And then, of course, thirdly, the other thing I think is from what I've seen, the greatest barrier to young families entering into Christian adoption is the financial part. If you think about it, Thomas Sowell says it like this: most people complain against 1%ers in our country in terms of wealth without realizing they'll be in the 1% one day in their life. It's just not now. The boomers, that fourth quarter rolls around, people have had the opportunity to have accumulating assets. And that's when they enter, whether it's 1% or not, they enter into higher brackets economically. The problem is, and I think God has designed this in the church so that we need each other, is that the generation that is most adoption minded is also probably the poorest generation, and the generation that has the most money maybe doesn't have the energy to actually be the ones adopting themselves. They're already many times in that sort of empty nest phase, and so the church needs each other. The greatest, I think, barrier many times is just that it's expensive. And Christian families are like, yeah, one day I can stroke a $20,000 check, but not when we're 2 years into marriage, have one kid already, and we're 25 years old. And so the church needs to come around them in a financially. Most people that go through a Christian adoption, they have something set up through Lifesong or some other ministry. Our church, for example, man, we've said, hey, if you're a member of our church, if you're in a community group and you step forward to adopt, the second your home study's done, we're going to pay 25% of that adoption right off the top. We want to be the first supporter. We want your brothers and sisters in Christ who are tithing to this church to take joy in that adoption. It's funny, Ed, I've never seen a Christian adoption go unfunded. And yet it is still one of, I think, the most prevailing fears naturally of why people don't get in the game. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to be able to say, man, I've never seen God's people forsaken. He's never forsaken the righteous. So we're going to be able to see these Christian families get adopted, but we're going to need to support them financially to see that happen.
Super. We're going to come back. We got one more segment, lightning round of questions and calls. We've got several of you on the line. 877-548-3675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. Chosen, Building Your Family the Way God Builds His by Andrew Hopper. We'll continue our conversation in a moment. Hey, we're back, and we're going to go to calls. And callers, I need your help. I need your help to get right to the call and to the questions so we can kind of have a bit of a lightning round. I'm going to give you one more time the phone number. We're talking about adoption, maybe your adoption story, how your church is involved. Lots of things to talk about. Questions for Andrew, 877-548-3675. 548-3675. We're going to go to Beth. Beth, you're live on the air. Go right ahead with your question or your comment.
Hi. Very quickly, my parents took in a lot of foster kids. We adopted the last foster kids as a family. It's not easy. I'm very upfront about that. We've kept in touch with other foster kids. Now, I've always had a passion for foster kids and for adoption, probably because of my how I was raised. I would like some hands-on suggestions that I could help with because I cannot adopt or become a foster parent. I have a lot of health issues. So what are some of the suggestions I can do? I've definitely donated. I've done different things to help foster kids. Just what is it that I might be able to do to be hands-on?
Super, super, Gloria. I love this. You want to be more involved. Let me say before Andrew answers, I want to give you a copy of Chosen: Building Your Family the Way God Builds His, which has some of those suggestions. So, talk to us a little bit, Andrew. Gloria's already giving. She already cares. What are some other ways she can be hands-on involved?
Yeah, for sure. I think that one of the things that we talk about a lot is that, the family extension through aunts and uncles. And you may have, Gloria, you may have families in your church that are going to adopt, and this is what happened in our family. But we don't have immediate family that is right around us. We're 3 hours from one set of parents. We're 8 hours from another set of parents. And yes, they have brothers and sisters and mom and dad when my child Faith Ann came into our home. But it really took a network of people to come around us and say, hey, where is those aunt and uncle type figures? Where is those grandmother, grandfather type figures? And so I love to hear that you're giving. And how can you begin to make yourself more available for families that are within your local church or local community that could really benefit from some of those types of relationships? Hey, I can pick the kids up from school, or man, I want you to know I'm praying for them by name every single day. Or, hey, don't let a birthday go by without letting me know, because I'm going to make sure they have a card and a gift card, and I'm going to be there for them. And that aunt and uncle, grandmother, grandfather type of role, I think would be something that would be just another area that you might be able to support these families like crazy.
So good, so good. All right, let's go to Abby. Abby in Cleveland. Abby, you're live on the air.
Hi.
Go right ahead, Abby.
Oh, so I just wanted to share that my husband and I are in the midst of an international adoption of siblings, and we're in the waiting phase right now. And you just talked about finances not too long ago, and our church actually has an adoption grant that covered almost half of our cost, which was just amazing. And then the people in our church, so the congregation, also have been contributing towards our adoption, so that like the majority and pretty much all of the costs have been paid. We did have to get another grant from somewhere else, but the adoption grant through our church it gave us peace. We didn't really have to worry about the finances, and it's all covered now.
I love that. I love that. What a great story. Okay, and if you hold on just a second, too, Abby, we want to give you a copy of Chosen: Building Your Family the Way God Builds His. I do wonder, Andrew, like, how common is it now in kind of our space, kind of the evangelical church space? I think if it's more of an outlier than it is common, like adoption grants and adoption ministries, or maybe I'm wrong. What do you see?
There are a lot of things out there that, once you get under the hood, and there is a lot of that. I think the biggest thing to me was to hear it wasn't just from the outside, though. It was her local church. That the resourcing for what we need to do for the mission of God is right there, man. It's people that are in our local church being willing to contribute and give. I mentioned this earlier, we've never seen the righteous forsaken, and we won't see it. I really believe that when it comes to Christian adoption, that when people step up faithfully, in accordance with Ephesians 2:10, the calling that God has on their life, and the right motivation, like I just believe the resources are going to be there. It speaks a language that our heart understands as believers. We want to jump in and fund these things. And so I think it's a great opportunity for the church to shine. One of the things we didn't get into, and I'll just mention it briefly here, is that that story that she just shared of her church supporting them in that way, that sends a shockwave through a community that doesn't quite understand why Christians live such a weird life. Why would you take this on? Especially I think about in our case, we have 3 healthy biological kids. You can just see the look. People are like, why would you guys do this? And it's just an opportunity to bring a sign of the kingdom. I'm not saying it's building the kingdom, but I am saying it's bringing a sign of a kingdom that is coming. I really just want to encourage that church. Man, you just spoke something of a testimony in your community that may reach far more people than you even realize.
Yeah, so good. For the listener who maybe feels stirred, but also maybe a little overwhelmed, fear, finances, uncertainty, all things you've addressed, what kind of first and second step would you encourage them to take after hearing the conversation? In two ways. And we got a couple minutes left in the show. In one way, like, they're open to adoption, but another way they want to support those who are. Help us out.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would do is, whether it's this book or others, I would spend some time trying to understand what these families are going to go through. The 30-second pitch of adoption is so great, but when you get underneath it, you realize it's incredibly difficult. And so, for those families that are going to step into these waters, I think to really understand what type of fight they're coming up against, and for others to do more than just kind of be rah-rah in their corner, but actually realize they're going into a spiritual battle here. We need to support them in really great ways. So I would definitely, if this is something that sparks interest, begin to learn their podcasts. There's shows just like this one. There are other books. Just try to get under the hood on it. And then the second thing I would do is immediately I would try to find someone in my community, and I'm telling you they're there because Christians are just doing the Christian thing quietly, underground, all over this country. They're adopting kids. And so I would find a family that has already walked this road, that is in a very strong evangelical church, that has the gospel as their motivation. And I would sit down with them and I would say, hey, pour into me. We're thinking about this. That is what happened in our family. We had a really incredible family in Murfreesboro, that ends up, they're church planters now in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. But we watched them go through their second international adoption, and we were up close and personal, and just all of the wrestling, all of the theology, all of the pain, all of the joy. We got to see it up close. We're mentored by them, and it greatly affected our story.
So good. And Andrew, thanks for your life and witness here. And again, having been at your church, I'm thankful for you and for your book as well. Let me also say thanks to my team, Karen Hendren, our producer, Merle St. James, our engineer, associate producer, Lisa Gempe. And if you want to hear this program again, as always, go to edstetzerlive.com. Again, Ed Stetzer Live is a production of Moody Radio and ministry of Moody Bible Institute. Thanks for listening.